The rugged, mountainous frontier separating Afghanistan and Pakistan has long been geopolitically significant. A place where empires clashed and local loyalties were forged over centuries. In recent decades, it has become synonymous with conflict and instability. Within this complex narrative, the role of the United States is hotly debated, often simplified into stark, accusatory claims. Former U.S. President Donald Trump frequently argued the U.S. was betrayed and Pakistan duplicitous, claiming America became a victim of its own misguided generosity. These politically potent assertions obscure deeper, more complicated truths from the last half-century. This piece moves beyond simple blame to untangle U.S. involvement in the Pakistan-Afghanistan corridor. We will use a myth versus fact framework to dissect persistent claims. The objective is not to absolve any actor, but to offer calm, measured analysis grounded in context and evidence. Understanding requires acknowledging the agency of all parties, the United States, Pakistan, and various Afghan factions. Doing so reveals an intricate web of decisions and consequences leading to today. The story is multi-layered and demands careful attention. A common and powerful myth suggests that the United States single-handedly created the modern conflict in Afghanistan with its 2001 invasion, which in turn caused all subsequent instability in neighboring Pakistan. This narrative posits a peaceful, if not perfect, region thrown into chaos solely by American military action. The claim is that U.S. intervention was the original sin from which all other problems have flowed. While the U.S.-led campaign was undeniably a transformative event, this interpretation oversimplifies a much longer and more intricate history of turmoil. It effectively erases decades of preceding conflict that had already deeply scarred Afghanistan and shaped Pakistan's strategic outlook. The factual record presents a more complex picture. The U.S. military intervention in October 2001 was a direct response to the September 11th attacks, orchestrated by al-Qaeda from its safe haven within Taliban-controlled Afghanistan. The Taliban regime had refused to hand over al-Qaeda's leadership, triggering the invasion. However, Afghanistan was already in a state of protracted civil war. The Soviet invasion in 1979 had initiated a brutal decade-long conflict that devastated the country, shattered its institutions, and gave rise to the Mujahideen factions. After the Soviet withdrawal in 1989, these factions turned on each other in the 1990s civil war from which the Taliban emerged in 1996. Another pervasive myth, often voiced by critics like Donald Trump, is that the United States poured billions into Pakistan with no strings attached, a narrative that says the U.S. wrote a blank check and Pakistan cynically funded militants. This paints American aid as naive generosity exploited by a duplicitous partner. It implies U.S. officials were unaware or indifferent to how funds were used. But that simplifies a complex, fraught relationship of negotiation, tension, and oversight. In reality, U.S. aid was multifaceted and often conditional, military versus civilian. Since 2001, Pakistan received substantial support, but it was split into categories. Coalition support funds, reimbursements for costs Pakistan incurred, like patrolling the border and providing logistical routes. Security assistance to build capacity to fight insurgents, civilian and economic aid for development, education, and strengthening democratic institutions. U.S. officials repeatedly expressed frustration over alleged support for groups like the Haqqani Network and on several occasions withheld or suspended aid. The context was mutual dependency and divergent interests. The U.S. needed Pakistan's cooperation for operations in landlocked Afghanistan. Pakistan provided vital supply lines and intelligence, making it indispensable yet difficult. Pakistan leveraged dependency to secure aid while pursuing regional strategy, including ties with Afghan Taliban factions as a hedge against India. So the blank check theory mischaracterizes reality. The relationship was a push and pull, a strategic bargain with limited leverage. The money flow reflected a difficult geopolitical reality, not naive generosity. Contradicting the blank check myth is an alternative claim that the United States was a powerful puppet master dictating Pakistan's policies, forcing it to support or abandon specific militant groups against its will. This view portrays Pakistan as a reluctant client state, compelled by American pressure to act in ways that undermined its security and sovereignty. It suggests that Pakistan's military and intelligence agencies were merely following orders from Washington, particularly during the anti-Soviet jihad of the 1980s and the War on Terror after 2001. This narrative, while acknowledging American power, strips Pakistan of its own agency and strategic motivations. The historical facts demonstrate cooperation and collision, not simple domination. In the 1980s, the US and Pakistan were close allies against the Soviet Union. The CIA provided funding and weapons, while Pakistan's ISI managed logistics, training, and distribution to Afghan fighters. But the ISI strategically favored groups like Gulbuddin Hekmatyar's Hezb-e-Islami to advance long-term goals in Kabul. After 2001, Pakistan allied with the US against al-Qaeda, but its approach to the Taliban was more complex. It cracked down on some militants while allegedly maintaining ties with others seen as future strategic assets. The alliance was fractious. Influence flowed both ways. A persistent myth holds that the United States secretly planned a permanent military presence in Afghanistan for regional dominance. The goal, it is said, was a strategic foothold in a resource-rich crossroads near China, Russia, and Iran, with counterterrorism and nation-building as mere pretexts. This narrative suggests a consistent, unyielding policy of occupation across administrations. However, policy debates and decisions reveal ambivalence and shifting strategy, not a unified plan. President George W. Bush targeted al-Qaeda. President Barack Obama ordered a surge in 2009 and simultaneously announced a withdrawal timeline, signaling skepticism of a long-term military solution. Costs mounted in money and lives, and public support eroded. Donald Trump made ending endless wars a slogan and negotiated the 2020 Doha withdrawal deal. Joe Biden executed the final withdrawal in 2021, despite some advice to retain a small residual force. Across 2 decades, strategies drifted between counterterrorism, counterinsurgency, and nation-building. The outcome reflects short-term decisions and unclear endgames, not a secret plan for permanent occupation. The dramatic, rapid collapse of Afghanistan's security forces and government in August 2021 is often blamed on a single cause: U.S. withdrawal. The departure is seen as pulling the rug from under a viable government, leading to immediate collapse. But that overlooks deep-seated weaknesses 2 decades in the making. Institutions were hollowed out by systemic problems long before 2021. Endemic corruption siphoned salaries, fuel, and ammunition, creating ghost soldiers and starving frontline units. Morale and legitimacy eroded. Leadership crises and political favoritism replaced competence. The state failed to project power beyond cities. Disputed elections undercut its mandate. In rural districts, a ruthless local order by the Taliban won grudging compliance and enabled negotiated surrenders. The U.S. withdrawal was a psychological shock and removed vital air and logistics support, accelerating collapse. But it exposed existing fragility. The foundations were already rotten. Many soldiers saw no reason to fight. No reliable pay, no competent leaders, no legitimate government. The collapse culminated 20 years of unresolved internal problems for which Afghan leaders and international partners share responsibility. In dissecting the intricate history of U.S. involvement in the Afghanistan-Pakistan region, it becomes clear that simple narratives of blame are insufficient. Claims by figures like Donald Trump capture fragments of truth, but miss the larger picture. The U.S. was powerful, often decisive, but never omnipotent. Policies played out amid deep-seated conflicts and sophisticated regional actors with misaligned objectives and unintended consequences. The U.S. did not create the Afghan conflict from scratch, but its interventions reshaped it. Aid to Pakistan was transactional and strategic, which Islamabad leveraged for its own ends. The U.S. was not an all-powerful puppet master. Pakistan pursued an independent foreign policy. Kabul's collapse reflected brittle state structures that crumbled once external support was removed. Responsibility is shared. U.S. strategic choices, Pakistan's security-driven hedging, and Afghan governance failures. Lasting stability cannot be imposed from the outside, especially not by force alone. More effective, humane policy begins with humility, patience, diplomacy, and support for inclusive local governance.